if you work around AI and technology, you need to become literate on how politics works. You need to understand the incentives that govern politicians, that govern their researchers. You need to understand that politics is the art of moving something through a system. It's not something that's like dirty and horrible. It's an important part of the game. They're powerful. They're almost like mini sovereign states. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room, but what you do need to be able to do is work with really smart people, because they will make your life far more interesting, and your professional life more interesting, and your personal life more interesting too. Not everyone is motivated by money right now. Some people have a tour of duty mentality where they can come in, make high impact decisions, and get things launched in 2 years, working in a massive bureaucracy. And right now, I think if you look at the UK's sort of tech space around government, that's like a living, breathing example of this. So I work at an organization called the Oxford China Policy Lab. We work on the US-China bilateral, where it intersects with AI and emerging tech. Specifically, my role is policy engagement, which means that I get to work with really clever people, take their really sharp insights and then dumb it down so I can understand it. And then I go and speak to people about what that stuff means. So it's quite a broad, given the nature of the role, quite a broad remit. A lot of my job involves just reading as much as I can, letting those thoughts percolate and trying to draw out, when I can, lines between X and Y.
Yeah, fascinating. I have a question straight off the back of this. When we were doing research, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you were quoted in The Economist on UK and China relations, arguing that collaboration on AI safety and security had added value in bilateral relations, as like China's ecosystem was essentially adopting some of the UK's approach. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about like the UK's approach and I guess like this particular relationship as well?
Of course. So let's break that into two. So the UK's approach to sort of AI security and safety, we have the world's leading AI Security Institute, which we created back when we did the Bletchley Summit, 2023-ish. And that has brought together some of the world's sort of foremost researchers on AI existential risk, security matters, so on and so forth. When we engage with China, that being us being the UK, we obviously have a very complex relationship. We have a trade relationship, security relationship, all the stuff that you guys will be familiar with. One of those elements of that relationship is on AI risk and AI sort of security. How do different countries think about that? Because like, if I was to ask, the three of us right now, what are the sort of 3 or 4 major risks that you consider down the pipeline? It actually might be a series of different answers, which makes diplomacy and engagement quite difficult if you're working towards other versions of what you think you're working towards. Yeah. So some of the stuff is like quite as simple as just like, are we on the same page on this? Do we think this is a risk? Do we think this is not a risk? Do we think this is an opportunity? And so on. So the UK has taken a pretty proactive view on that so far. Again, something that I'm very, very in favor of. And we also have, thankfully, in our sort of Whitehall apparatus, really good China expertise. So that's fantastic. It's complementary in that regard.
I want to ask, I guess more broadly, what AI is obviously changing, all the geopolitical dynamics and the power dynamics between, different nations and states. How is that actually happening? You're literally at the coalface here. How are the power dynamics changing, and where does Europe and specifically the UK kind of sit within that? I've watched a ton of like specifically YouTube videos about the next power of the world and what's going on there, and how where you should almost like be putting your money kind of thing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I can, with a massive caveat, which is that if I knew the answer, I would be a multi-billionaire.
Luke's trying to make a quick buck.
Yeah. And you're not a financial advisor, so this is not financial advice.
That is really key. My lawyer's shouting next door, actually, saying this is not financial advice. So with that settled, I think the really interesting point you raise is like, if you're a world leader right now, your sort of menu of things you had to consider looks very different 5 years ago as it does now. And the majority of world leaders at both the US and China level, and then sort of middle countries and everyone else as well, are not AI experts. So they have this constant stream of people coming towards them and saying, you need to be thinking about AI sovereignty, about defense sovereignty, about technology sovereignty, the opportunities, whatever. They're also trying to do a million things at once. There's, as we know, sort of ongoing war in Iran, prior to that, and still ongoing Ukraine, prior to that, a global pandemic. And so the whole time they're trying to conceptualize, what do I need to be doing on this front? And to a degree, one of the difficulties when you have the sort of geopolitics intersecting with technology is that technology people typically are like quite, 0 to 1. We like to have efficiency here. We can see how the rational system works here. Politics is not rational. Politics is like a pure game of incentives. I mean, I'm not sure if you guys have siblings, but siblings are a perfect example of politics in action. Sometimes you say to your little brother, like, can you please help me do this? There's no reason he says yes out of spite. He's just like, I'm not going to do it today. And you're like, well, that's really unhelpful. And so that actually
that
moves
analogy.
up the stack to how like global politics tends to work. And so you've obviously got people coming in and saying this technology could completely reform your economy. And you, as a leader, you say, okay, brilliant. What does that mean? Tangibly, what does that mean? And they say, oh, well, it could, make a third of white collar jobs redundant.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, how do I deal with that? And they go, well, we've not got to that point yet, actually. So we're still up for discussion on that. And then you go and speak to the next person who says, those guys, they love LLMs. They're completely obsessed. That's not going to happen. And by the way, we don't want data centers getting built because it ruins my local countryside. So, I'm going to get voted out the next election and so on and so forth. And so, to circle it back round, there are very few countries doing it right so far in that sense, only because what is right, if that makes sense. We don't really have a definition yet.
Okay,
it seems to be like a lot of, like, as you said, like brand new emerging thing introduced, completely disrupts how the system has worked. Previously, everyone is scrambling, but everyone knows it's powerful and good and we need a bit of it and we need to own our own little bit of it as well. But from like outside looking in, especially even just looking at the timeline as well on X, like I think there has been a shift in the way in which tech native individuals are working with those who sit in policy. And it more seems to be
specifically in the UK. I think
yes,
it's becoming more. It's always kind of been prevalent in the US, right? I think
definitely more so.
A lot more so. Not too sure about China, but it's the speed is getting there, right? We talked to a lot of people about policy, but then also they're in tech.
Yeah, like even like Minister Kanishka as well is like doing launches on X, and like we think that's a great thing. Like we had him on the show, and it's really cool. But like, is that is that like not even a consequence, has negative connotations, but is that a byproduct of the fact that we need sort of more tech native AI experts, as you say, to come in and like advise and help and move things along?
1,000%. And I think just to build on that point, one of the things that makes me want to smack my head off the table a million times in half an hour is when someone fails to understand how critical like a punchy civil service role can be, especially on the AI front. And we have literally dozens of examples in the last 3 years. Look at how the AI Security Institute or Safety Institute was built. Look at the people who pushed that through, the speed they pushed it through, the work they've done before, the way like their salaries prior to this too. Not everyone is motivated, and I'm capitalist. It's great. I love money, but not everyone is motivated by money right now. Some people have a tour of duty mentality where they can come in, make high impact decisions and get things launched in 2 years, working in a massive bureaucracy. And right now, I think if you look at the UK's sort of tech space around government, that's like a living, breathing example of this. You've mentioned Tom Westgarth earlier on. Great example of someone who's like, legend. What a legend. High autonomy, comes in, does his thing, like, just very impressive. And there are multiple Toms that I come across on like a daily basis, working around the civil service, working around politics in Britain and in other countries too. A lot of them young guys and girls who are like, yeah, I could be making X 100,000 here a year, but actually going to do for 18 months, 2 years, this specific role because it matters to me to do that. Yeah. And that's not to, by the way, talk down upon people who choose not to do that, but just to say that, when I see people say, oh, the salary is really bad. It is really bad. That's politics. Brilliant. That's just how it is. So we're going to do about it,
No, I see that a lot. I think Matt Clifford, maybe had a few points on this recently where like, there is, yes, okay, the salaries aren't great and that's just the way it is. But like most of the people that are coming in have they've done their bit and now they're sort of coming back to do the tour of duty in a sense. So like they're not really financially motivated to do that. Just maybe going like zooming out a little bit high level. Is there, not to be like doomerism, but like it would be good to get your thoughts on like, is there something that we're not really prepared for that we should be prepared for looking forward? Like I think maybe one of the common arguments, and I've kind of changed my tune. I used to be a bit of a Musk, Sam Altman, Maxi in the sense where like we shouldn't be regulating this. We should just be going all guns forward. But after watching The Thinking Game and seeing Demis's approach, I now align myself a lot more with his sort of approach to everything. But is there within those realms, is there something that maybe we're missing, something that we should be worried about, something that we should keep our eyes open for?
Really fair question. I don't have a clear answer for you. I think a couple of things are prudent regardless. Number one is that if you work around AI and this technology, you need to become literate on how politics works. And by that, I don't just mean, we throw money at an issue and hope it fixes it. You need to understand the incentives that govern politicians, that govern their researchers. You need to understand that politics is the art of moving something through a system. It's not something that's like dirty and horrible. It's an important part of the game. The second thing is also, if you're working around these things, you need to understand the people at the top. You've alluded to Musk, Sam Altman there, Demis, whatever. Each of these people is governed by their own interpretation of the world. Often they've like watched a sci-fi film or read a book when they were 12, and they're like, that is now my framework for everything. So if you can understand their framework, you can begin to understand that stuff too. And too often I see people just being like, oh yeah, in diplomacy and foreign policy, if you're trying to understand a country, especially an autocratic country, it's just like an obvious point that you understand the leader of that country, what makes them tick. And that's the same mentality that I would try and bring to understanding all of these tech companies too. Not to compare them to autocratic countries, but just they're powerful. They're almost like mini sovereign states. I think a combination of those two things with a sort of final sprinkling of this technology is moving really, really fast. So fast that I mean, you guys work on this every single day. I wake up and I'm like, what the hell has happened in the last 24 hours?
Every day, every day.
It's like I go on holiday and I'm like, oh, I'm 8 years behind. So, how do you translate that into policy timelines, into sort of strategy? Very difficult. Requires a lot of translators, quite literal, like tech translators, to translate their abstract concepts into more tangible things for policy people and diplomats and so on and so forth. Those three things paired together, I don't know if they fix everything. They probably don't, but they go some way to trying to help the sort of broader education.
I love it. That was a great
So
answer.
good. Absolutely.
Dude, thank you so much for the time.
Have a good one.
Cheers,
Enjoy the
guys.
rest of
Have a
your
good
day.
one.
We'll see you soon.
Cheers.